Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association and Engage Selling. Please note that you've been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar, but you can ask questions using the Ask Question function in your GoToWebinar dashboard as we go along. You also have access to a PDF of this webinar downloadable from the handout section of your dashboard. Today's webinar will cover 5 key steps to stronger sales presentations and will be presented by Colleen Francis of Engage Selling. Colleen is recognized as one of the world's top sales consultants and has helped organizations create greater sales success with her frank, no-nonsense approach. She is a distinguished certified sales professional, a past president of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, and a member of the Canadian Speaking Hall of Fame. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Colleen to start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to have you all on the call today. Hope you're having a great selling week. And I just realized that it's almost the end of the month. So thank you for taking time out at the end of the month, because I know that it's a crazy time for everybody as we go through. So what I wanted to do today was start a little bit backwards, because one key to a stronger sales presentation is making sure that you prepare properly. What I mean by that is that you do a really great qualification step. And so in order to do that, there's some key elements that you have to execute on properly in the sales process, so you've got all the information you need in order to have a great sales presentation. So if you think about the qualification phase while you're asking questions during a customer meeting or customer meetings, depending on how complex your sales cycle is, the one thing we always need to be getting at are client objectives. What are the client's objectives in doing this project or solving a problem or in buying your product? Why did they reach out to you? What problem are they trying to solve, or what are they trying to gain? We also want to make sure that those objectives have a business value associated with them. So if the client's objective is to save time, why do they want to save time? How much time do they want to save? And how much money is that going to create for them? If the client wants to reduce turnover, how much money will that save them in not having to rehire people? If the client is looking for productivity gains, why is that? And how much money are they going to gain from that productivity? For example, a client of mine in the industrial supply business, one of the business objectives their client has is to reduce the downtime of equipment. So if they reduce the downtime, if they cut it in half, how much more productivity does each of the machines have? How much more money does that plant make? How much do they save in maintenance costs? So we want to get to that monetization of each of those objectives so that we know how much money we're making or saving the client. Also, we need to get at the business driver of those objectives. And I was thinking about this the other day with a client in the engineering space, engineering management, because we need to know what is causing the market conditions. Why does that company want to expand their plant? But also, what people are driving that? You see, if you're an engineering company and you're being asked to submit a bid to help build a new facility, what's happening in the marketplace that's driving the desire for that expansion, but also who inside the organization is driving that expansion? Is it coming from the sales team? Is it coming from legal? Is it coming from engineering? That way you can determine who else needs to be involved in this presentation. We need to understand the success criteria. How are they going to make a decision about whether you're the right company to work with, and what's the priority? This question gets missed all the time, and salespeople think, oh, it's just going to be price, when it's not always price. It could be other things, right? And so it's critical that you ask the priority of that criteria. Money, right? How much money do they have set aside? What's their budget? How much do they want to spend? Time frame for implementation. So not the time in which they want to say yes, but the time in which they want to actually be implemented. And that's important because it's going to help you get a faster yes. So don't ask, when do you want to make a decision? Ask, when do you want to be using this information? Decision makers, of course, we need to know who's making the decision, who's influencing them, and what process they'll take to make those decisions, a committee, a group presentations, and then we want to get to conceptual agreement. What I mean by that is we want to get to the point where they are agreeing that we're one of the right people, that they're interested in a proposal, that maybe we've even talked to them a little bit about what we do in order to get some agreement, to bounce some ideas off of each other, to help involve them in the proposal before we submit that final presentation. Okay. So after all of that is done, there's a couple of things that I'm going to suggest you do before you actually do the formal presentation. The first step is something that I call testing the waters, or a draft approach. I'm sure that some of you on the call today have seen a copy of my book, Nonstop Sales Boom, or have been on my website at engageselling.com, and you'll know, if you've been there, that I talk about this extensively, and so you can get all the scripts from the book or from the website. What I love to do on my most important presentations is just ask a couple of questions. Can I make a suggestion? It's a rhetorical question. Nobody ever says no to that. And then I say, I'd like to make sure I get my proposal right the first time. Or I'd like to make sure that I've understood everything accurately based on our conversation. So how about I prepare a draft of our proposal, and we can arrange a time next week to review it. So we set aside a date and a time, maybe an hour, where I might come back in person or set up a GoToMeeting or a WebEx just like this and bring up the presentation online. And we run through the presentation. And I get them to provide input and feedback on the options that I provided, on the pricing even, if it's valid to put the pricing in, on my assumptions, just to make sure that I've made all the right assumptions, I've got everything clear, and that they're happy. What I'm looking for is a neutral environment, a stress-free environment in which they feel that they can add feedback without it being the final presentation, because I always end up with better questions, more objections in this part of the presentation, which means I can go back and refine things. Just as a quick, Stephanie, I saw your question here. EngageSelling.com is my website, and you're more than welcome to visit me there. The last step that I have is to always leave my qualification phase with a soft close. So there's a couple of things you'll notice here. I say, I thank them for the conversation, so I'm setting them up for still building rapport and trust, and then I say, I'm going to take what we've discussed and work on a couple of options. A couple of options is important because there's a psychological trigger that happens here. If I come to the client in a presentation with a one-size-fits-all, take-it-or-leave-it type promotion or proposal, then the question they ask in their mind is, should I do business with Colleen? But if I come to them with 2 or 3 ways in which we can meet their objectives, then the question in their mind changes to, how should I do business with Colleen? And so I always say to them, I'll take this information away and work up a couple of options that we can review. And then I say to them, in the meantime, here's some information, or here's a website, or here's a document, here's a case study that I'd like you to review on, and then something that you've been discussing. And I'd like you to consider that or to think about it because. And I do that because you know that the client is going to be doing research on you after you leave. And so you want them to have access to information you want them to have, right? They can find anything out about anything on the web. Your competition is, of course, going to come in with information. They're going to do some Google research. And what we want to do is make sure that they have access to information that puts us in a positive light. Excellent. Okay, so then we've got some internal steps. I always think it's important for salespeople to make sure that they are actually ready to give this presentation. So we need to ask ourselves, before we go forward and present a presentation to them, we have to ask, do you know why they're going to buy? Do you absolutely know why they're going to buy? Do you know if the value you're providing matches the reason? So are the features and benefits in your product or your service suite in alignment with what the customer actually wants? Do you know who you're competing against? Do you know who's going to make the final decision? These are really critical questions. And of course, do you know how and when they will make the decision? Without answers to these questions, I don't think that you can give an effective sales presentation. So make sure that you're really trusting your information here. Do a gut check and make sure you're not putting yourself in a position to lose because you don't have this information. If you don't, it's okay to make a U-turn. It's absolutely okay to call the customer back and to say, hey, I realized I forgot to ask you something, or I was going through this proposal and I missed some critical information, or can we meet one more time, or I have one last question. The worst thing is that the customer says, no, but chances are they're going to say, wow, you're being really thorough. So don't hesitate to go back. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't want to encourage you to go back if you don't need to. I'm not telling you to use this as a sales trick. I'm telling you that it's okay to go back. If you're really feeling unsure, you don't understand something the customer said that you have in your notes, or you think you're missing information, or someone in the company that you're working for said, hey, what about this? And you can't answer it, then absolutely go back and make sure you've got that information. Okay, so now let's talk about the sales presentation. So what you're all here for. This is the format that I advocate as the best format for all sales presentations. And there is a copy of these slides that are available for you in a downloadable PDF, so you have access to this. And again, the kind of information we're talking about here is all over my website at engageselling.com. But what we're doing is we first are always going to start with objectives. So your presentation is always going to start with an understanding and a recap of what the client is trying to accomplish. Then we're going to talk about the features, benefits that we're advocating are the best solutions to meet those objectives. We're going to show proof. We're going to ask a question to make sure they understand how we meet those objectives. Then we're going to give them the investment, and then we're going to ask our closing question. Okay, so that's the format we're going to cover for the next 45 minutes together. And of course, if you have any questions as we go through this, make sure you ask them as we go. But one thing I'd really like to encourage is a best practice that we see where you can actually do this presentation by heart, that you don't need a PowerPoint slide, that you could actually take out a flip chart marker or a whiteboard marker and do this presentation on a whiteboard. Why do I advocate this? Because then you own it. For those of you that follow me on social media, I think it was on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, I posted a LinkedIn Live presentation where I challenged people. I said, dump the PowerPoint, go in and do your presentation by heart, engage with the customer, ask questions. And the reason why I advocate this is it's really critical that the customer is as engaged in the conversation, in the presentation as you are. Too often when I see salespeople either going through document or going through a PowerPoint slide, it's a one-way push of information and the buyer doesn't say anything. And that's not what we want. We want the buyer to be engaged. So we're going to start with objectives. The way we do this is we list all the objectives. We say, as based on our last conversation, I understand that A, B, C, and D are your objectives. And then we're going to confirm, is that still the case? Has anything changed? It's important that you do this because things may have changed. What's really important is you then ask them which of these is the most important, or where would you like me to start, or encourage them to discuss in the group what might be the most important, or where you would like to start, or if anything has changed. Don't get scared if they start to debate. If they start to debate, that probably means that they're engaged with you, that they actually want to have a discussion with you, and at the end of their debate in the room, they're going to come up with their best list. Now, this does require that you be a bit flexible. So this is another reason why maybe a PowerPoint deck isn't the greatest deck, because if they come up and say, hey, I'd like you to start with number 4, and you had planned on starting with number 1, then you need to reorganize on the fly. But you have to start with the most important. There's 2 reasons for this. One, when you start with the most important, they immediately see what's in it for me. Right? I think it was Zig Ziglar that first coined that expression, WIIFM, as the most popular radio station in the world. We want to start with what's most important to them. Second of all, I know many of you in complex sales environments are selling to multiple decision makers, and sometimes the most senior level decision maker comes into the room, they stay a few minutes, and they leave because they're busy. They're back to back to back to back to back to back meetings. And so if you start with the most important issue, then you make sure that the most important decision makers hear your most important resolutions. A similar situation happened to me years ago. I was selling to Dow Chemical, and we went through this exercise. We went through the objectives. They said, yep, those are the objectives. I said, where do you want me to start? They debated for a few minutes and gave me one item. I was talking about data management solutions. It was on storage management of data. And we had a 2-hour window to present for this particular project we were working on. And we spent 90 minutes on this particular issue because it was so important to them. And which was great because they saw how robust a solution we had. They were able to answer and ask all the questions that they wanted, and they got the information they needed to go forward, and we won that piece of business. But it was because we were flexible and really were able to showcase them our solutions based on their most important issues. So that's how we're going to start with the objectives. Then we're going to slide into the features and benefits. But the issue here, and the most important thing that I need to get across, is a reminder that the only value that matters, or the only objectives that matter, is the value, the objectives that matter to the customer. I bring this up because I spend a lot of time working with highly qualified experts, technical experts. I work with a lot of salespeople who are engineers, who have MBAs, who have masters, who have PhDs even in some of the work that they do. And the challenge with highly educated sales force is we tend to love our products and services based on what we think is great about them, but we don't often get from the customer what they think is great or what's important to them. And so we don't want to oversell, but we also don't want to share with them what is in our best interest or what we love the most. We want to give them the option to tell us. The only value that matters is the value that matters to your customer. So let's talk about features and benefits. A quick review. A feature is how you do something, right? It's the technical specification. It's the expertise that you have. It's the platform that you use. It's the app or the website or the software. It's the software as a service. It's the scheduling component. It's the function. It's the people. If you're in a consulting business, it's the people that you use. Those are the features, the how you do it, the structure, the process. The benefits are why that how matters. And I bring this up. I hadn't planned on talking about this today, but the reason I'm bringing it up is I have spent the last 2 weeks with a number of different sales teams, all who are great sales teams. I mean, all of these sales teams are exceeding their goals, and they're all smart, experienced, educated, technical experts. And they're getting confused as to the how and the why. So the benefit is always why that matters. Why do they care about that platform? Why do they care about that drone? Why do they care about that manufacturing process? Why do they care about that widget? And ultimately, it comes down to financial gain, time savings, which could also be financial gain, reduction in loss, or in some cases, reduction in risk. It may not be that you're making them money, but if you're keeping them out of the news and keeping them in compliance with something, you're saving them money. And what's critical here is benefits must outweigh features. You can't have, 10 benefits, 10 features, and only one benefit. There should be multiple benefits to each one of those features, or multiple values to each one of those features that you're giving, because then you're going to show why your solution is worth it for them. So the best-in-class salespeople that I work with really make sure to show that each of the things that they're talking about, each of the functions or the specifications, have a return on investment associated with them that are going to save them time or reduce risk or make them more money or save them money. Because the more benefit that your product provides, the more likely you are to win the business. Okay. If you have any questions as we go, I am monitoring questions, so don't hesitate to ask anything based on the content. So as we're presenting, and I want to give you a couple of examples here of what this looks like. Based on our conversation and your challenges or your objectives, I'm recommending the following options because, or I'm recommending the following product because. It's just some simple language. We're going to go into the features and benefits. And the benefit statements always need to be, this will help you. Right? So I'm recommending the following software solution because, and we're going to list the benefits. Or I'm recommending the following fertilizer, or the following corn seed, or the following planting plan, or the following manufacturing process. And you can detail all of the features of that process. Ultimately, when you transition to benefits, the simple language is, this will help you, or you will benefit from this because, or this is going to help you. But you need to make that connection for the customer, because far too many customers do not connect the feature with the benefit. I do think it's a great question that somebody just asked about engaging with the customer is a tough task sometimes. Absolutely. And that's why in a presentation, you're going to see that I place a number of questions in here so that you're gauging the feedback in the room. Now, I am not afraid of saying to a customer, let's say there's 5 or 6 people in the room, they're not asking any questions, just single them out and say, hey, Colleen, what do you think about this? Or Bob, I know when we spoke on the phone last week, this was your most important objective. Did I get that right? Don't hesitate to call people by their name and engage with them, because if the customer is not talking, you are not winning the sale. You have no hope of winning the sale if the customer isn't engaged. Then we're going to add proof. So at the end of every feature and benefit conversation, we have to be able to say, for example. The most important proof points to your customer are those that come from their peers. Companies like them, people like them, third parties. If you've got research that shows value calculators or any information that comes from maybe a research center, they're always going to believe that first, and then they're going to believe you. It's not that they think you're lying, it's just that they know you're the salesperson, and they know that it's your job to say great things about your products and services. But when I say, for example, at this other company down the road or at this other government department, then they're more likely to listen to that proof. They're more likely to believe the claims I'm making about my product. So you have two choices here. If you're allowed to use your clients' names, for example, at State Farm, or for example, at Chevron, or for example, at the Department of Defense, that's great. If you're not, then just say at other government departments, or with the provincial government sector that I work with, or other manufacturing companies, or other Toronto-based companies. You can always just use the industry type if you can't use the specific customer name. And if the customer says, oh, really? What other government departments do you work with? If you have to keep those confidential, you can say the nature of our work is confidential, and I've promised our clients we won't share that information, just as I wouldn't share your information if you came to do business with us. An interesting question here. Do you assess your audience as to whether or not they are technically oriented and tailor your responses based on functions of people they're responsible for? Absolutely. Now, as you can tell, I'm a big advocate of making sure you're talking to people in advance of the presentation. So ideally, you're not assessing them in the room. You know who's going to be in the room, and you know, okay, Bob is technical, someone else is financial, someone else is, customer service or marketing oriented. So when I'm running through the benefits, I might say, Bob, this is going to meet your technical specifications by A, B, and C and make it easier for you to implement software so you don't have to add people in order to manage this project. Mary, I know you're really interested in the return on investment, and what we've seen is, and Colleen, from a customer standpoint, this is going to make it easier to interact with your customers because they're able to add repeat orders. So I might tailor my benefits to the different people in the room knowing what their function is. Great question. Then I'm always going to ask a question. After I've delivered features and benefits and that proof statement, I'm going to ask a question like, what do you think? This is not my closing question. This is not me asking for the sale. This is just me making sure that everyone is comfortable with the solution that I've offered for that objective. I'm very careful with the questions here. I don't ever ask, do you understand? Because no one likes to admit to a salesperson that they don't understand. What we want to say is, what do you think? Do you see how that can solve that issue for you? Do you like the way we've handled that? Does this meet your needs? Is this in line with the expectation you had on how we could resolve this? Does this match up with your expectation, or does this match up with what other people have said? A great question that's come up here just in terms of presentation style of how do I suggest balancing objective of staying on time versus addressing questions along the way. I always start any sales meeting with an expectation of the time, an hour, or 2 hours. That being said, I always take their questions as we go. Because if the question is in their mind, I want them to ask it. It's better for you not to finish the entire presentation and have to schedule more time and address the most pressing needs at hand than it is for you to say, I'll take those questions at the end. Because when you say, I'll take those questions at the end, what you're saying to the customer is, I'm dismissing the important points you have. Now, if you're concerned about it because you show up in the room and you were expecting 2 people and there's 10, and so you could get really off track, you just ask the group up front and say, hey, I'm sure there's going to be tons of questions because we've got a great sized group today. I'm curious, would you prefer that I take your questions as we go, or would you like me to get through the presentations and take questions at the end? After I know that they're comfortable with my solution, then I give them the investment. I always do this after, because you know what? If they say, Colleen, I don't think this is going to work for us. You made a huge assumption that we're going to roll this out to 100 people and we have to roll it out to 1,000 people, or you way overestimated. The scope of this project is way bigger than we anticipated. We wanted plug and play. And if that's the case, then you might not want to show them the price, and you might want to backtrack and say, wait, wow, I really missed the mark here. I'm sorry about that. Could we spend some time retooling what this looks like so I can put together a more accurate investment level for you? So it helps here because we definitely want to make sure that we're not presenting a price that's out of alignment. Now, that happens very rarely, but I like to be prepared. I'm a big planner for Murphy's Law. If it can't happen, it might happen. And so I would much rather be prepared for that. Another small little tip, we always talk about our pricing in terms of investment. Your investment in this program is because that assumes that you're going to get a return on investment. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. So with proof, so what kinds of proof can you can offer? We've talked about the features and benefits. We talked about, then we want to go into the proof. So the proof is, if you look at this ROI calculation. So I have 2 clients in different industries. One's in oil and gas and one's in agricultural inputs. And both of them have rolled out return on investment calculators, meaning they show what they're spending today versus the performance of their product versus what they would be spending with their product, and then what the return on investment is expected to be. And one of my clients I know has seen a 31% increase in their closing rate as a result of that calculator. They measure now sales that were opportunities in the pipeline that have a calculator associated with them, and those that don't, and they have those that do. Tangling up my words here. And those opportunities that the sales rep uses the ROI calculator have a 31% better closing rate than those that don't. So if it's at all possible to create an ROI calculator for your product, I would do that. The proof could also be, as I mentioned, at ABC Corporation, or you might say, I've found that at other companies, or reports show, other clients in manufacturing tell us, the consultants that I work with, or in this study you will see. You cannot overuse proof. It's the single most important part of your sales presentation. So we want to talk about objectives, which is important because we're putting the client's needs first. We want to show the features and benefits because that's how we bring value to the customer, how we solve their problems. But then we want to show proof that it works because it's always in the back of their customer's mind in this marketplace. Yeah, but have you worked with someone like me? Yeah, but does this really work? Yeah, but what examples do you have? And so you need to address that during this presentation. Always come prepared in this presentation with a list of 2 or 3 customers that they can call in case they ask. Always come prepared with leave behinds on case studies and testimonials, videos if you have them, or these calculators or research, independent research, because all of that is going to help you justify the value. This proof is much more important than your experience. Sales presentations that show, this is who we are. Here's a picture of our lovely building. Here's the number of years experience we have. Here's all of our degrees. Here's how much time we spent developing the product. None of that stuff matters if you can't prove it doesn't work in the marketplace. Then we want to ask these questions, which I ran through already. Does this make sense? Which is one of my favorite questions. Do you have any questions? What feedback do you have? Do you see how this can help? Does this meet your objectives? Now, if you get blank stares, a great thing to say is, normally at this time, clients ask me questions around, or some of the most important questions I get, or some of the most thoughtful questions I get at this time are. So always come prepared with a couple of preceded questions that you get asked all the time, simply because that helps to warm people up. And chances are, if you've heard the question 5 or 6 times from other buyers, you're going to hear it, from them eventually. It's in their mind. For just some reason, they're not articulating it. So it's okay, but it's a great idea to say a lot of people want to know about. Okay, did I cover all of the issues for you? Is another one. So we're going to ask that question to try to gauge. And at this point, hopefully you do get some questions, you get some objections, you get some concerns. You might retool some of the proposal if you need to. You might have to go back and re-explain things. But you need to stay in this feature benefit proof question circle until they say, yep, got it, all good. I understand that you can and how you can solve my problem. So we repeat and stay in this area for as long as we need to before we get to the investment. A couple of questions have come up on the panel here that I want to discuss. So one was, how do you deal with someone who says, we'll take this information and pass it to the rest of the team? Well, ideally, you want to get that process out before you do the presentation. So when you're in that qualification and you're getting to the point of a presentation and you're in the decision-making process, questions you might ask, who else needs to see this? How are you guys going to make a decision? If your buyer says, hey, don't worry about it, give me the presentation and I'll send it to the rest of the team. Then I try to ask questions on who else will be involved, so who is the rest of the team, so that I can make sure to address their issues. What questions do you think they have? Should we invite them to this presentation? How will you be presenting that information? I push a little bit to try to get those people to the table, but in some organizations, it's just never going to happen. And so then you want to be equipped with questions like, what do you think your boss is going to say? How do you think marketing is going to respond to this? What issues do you think marketing will want to bring up? Another question that came up here is, how do you do this when you're a startup and you don't have any sales yet? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if you're a startup, depending on the type of industry you're in, you might have beta customers or alpha customers who've been using your product, or if it's a product you can use internally. And so you might want to use the results from those to say, hey, this is what we're seeing in early studies, or this is the problem that we're trying to solve. Or you might have to find some people on that early adopter and be really honest with them and say, hey, we're a startup. And so we're looking for people who are willing to try this in their environment, in a production environment or in a test environment. So after we've gone through our features, benefits, proof, and question, and we've questioned and questioned and questioned and questioned until we know that they're comfortable, now we're going to talk about investment. So the big hint here is your investment really should be lower by about 2 to 10 times, and maybe it's dramatically lower than the benefit. So if you showed them $1 million in savings, you don't want to be selling them a $2 million product. Now, if it's $1 million a year and your product has a 10-year lifespan, then $2 million investment over a $10 million investment, a return on investment, is okay. But ideally, we want to be showing that if they invest $1 today, they're going to get $2 or $10 back. And what I find with clients is when they're able to do that, that's when the sales start rolling in. So for example, here's a real life calculator that one of my clients uses. So they bring this as their proof, and they can show the customer, they say, based on your goal to increase yields or increase manufacturing, I recommend product A. This is going to ensure you meet production objectives in the facility, in your Toronto facility, by improving the uptime of equipment by 4 hours a month, whatever that looks like. If we look at this calculation that I designed for you, you can see that a $15 investment will result in $30 more per revenue, or a $15 return on investment per machine. So they use this type of calculation to show how the customer. Now, if the customer has 100 machines, then they might say, multiply that by 100 machines, and we've got $1,500 ROI per month in that facility. So they're going to build that out. But it's a slightly different way of showing the customer how they're going to save money or make money. Okay, so we can align those features, benefits, and value by showcasing this kind of calculation. Now, if you don't have this kind of calculation, but you have clients who've said, you've saved me $1 million, then you can say that. You can say to the customer, based on your goal to reduce turnover, I'm recommending the following approach because it's going to do A, B, C, and D. And in fact, we have a customer roughly your size in Montreal who said to us, by using your approach on hiring and retaining employees, we saved $1 million in 1 year. So your investment of $100,000 this year is going to have a 10 times return on investment. How does that sound to you? So great question here. What are the simple ways that you calculate return on investment? And do you recommend outsourcing someone to create a calculator? I don't know if you need to outsource it. Depending on your company, it could be something that your marketing and sales teams or marketing and sales ops teams are able to create. So for example, a client of mine who produces a healthy cooking oil, their product is 25% more expensive. but they base their calculation on the fact that the restaurants don't have to, the oil is more stable, so they can reduce the drain, what they call a drain interval, how often they have to drain the deep fryer by 30%. So they're draining their deep fryer 30% less, they're spending 25% more, so the return on investment over a year is the difference between, so maybe it's 5%, I'm not sure exactly what it looks like, but you can see that that's one of the benefits. So it will really depend. What I would look at is what is the average amongst your customers that your customers either save time or reduce expenses. Another client of mine, for example, who has a tool that they sell to surgery centers. You know, if you're going into a private surgery center to have a colonoscopy or eye surgery, and it saves time for the nurses on how much administration they have to do. So their client says, it saves my nurses on average 6 hours a week of administration, and they know that that 6 hours a week is overtime, so they're able to say, okay, so what's the overtime wage? $20, let's say. So $20 times 6 hours is 120 hours, multiplied by 10 nurses is, $1,200 per week, multiplied by 4, $4,800. So this product that they're selling is about $2,000 a month, yet it's saving the service center $4,800 a month. So that's the way they're doing that return on investment calculator. It's a great question. So once we have run through our objectives, features, benefits, proof question, and talked about the investment, now we get to the closing question. And I put this in red because it's the most important part. It's also the most missed part. Oftentimes a client says to us, hey, this looks great. And then we don't ask, okay, can we get started? We say, great. We don't pay attention to the body language here. And so we've got to be asking for the business. It's a three-step process, in my opinion. First of all, we summarize. So the client says, hey, this looks great. I might say, okay, so let's summarize for a second. Based on our discussion, or what I heard you say was, or in reviewing the notes that I took in this presentation, you would like to do A, B, C, and D. Does that make sense? Right, so I'm going to summarize and I'm going to confirm my understanding. And then I'm going to ask for the sale. Shall we get this written up? Are you ready to move forward? Is it good to order? What should we do next? How would you like to proceed? Where do you want to go from here? What do you think? I mean, any of these questions. Ready to go ahead? All good? Can I write you up? Cash or credit? Where do we go from here? I mean, all of these questions are great closing questions. Are you ready to move forward? It's just critical that you ask, because this is the most forgotten part of the sales process, period. It's so common for salespeople to not ask, right? And being that we are a Canadian organization, I cannot help but quote our favorite Canadian sport, being hockey, in that Wayne Gretzky says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? It's so true. I mean, how many times are you at a hockey game and you're watching it and people are just yelling, shoot the puck, because we get so frustrated, right, that no one's shooting. They're just like passing it around behind the blue line, and we're thinking, God, if you just shoot the puck, you might be able to score, right? They know that. They're just trying to wait for the perfect time. The perfect time is when the buyer is ready. You're in the room. They're showing signs that it's that they're ready to buy, and so we need to ask the question, shall we get started? A great question here with investments. How do you change an ROI calculator so purchasing the product reduces your exposure or protects your investment? Yeah, absolutely. The way I have clients that do this with compliance, and they know that the compliance, like the environmental fines, are maybe $3,000 or $300,000 depending on what it is, and so they say to the customer, well, not doing this, your risk is X. By doing this, your risk is Y, because we guarantee that you're in compliance, or we reduce the exposure, or or we insure the product, whatever it happens to be. But yeah, you could do it as a risk reduction or an exposure reduction calculation. Absolutely. And if you don't have a calculator, or you don't know how to create one, the very best thing to do is to just go to your current customers and ask them, what value have you seen? How much, when they say, we love working with you, well, why? How much time have we saved you? How many people how many more employees have you retained? How much money have you made? One of my clients in the industrial supply business, they work with a big lumber mill out in Oregon, and they got called in because their competitive supplier couldn't provide lubricant to this mill, and the lines went down. And so they rushed in, did an emergency order, got the line back up running, and the customer has been doing business with them ever since. And the return on investment that the client uses, that says, is, look, when we went down because your competitor ran out of product, we lost $1 million in retail product. We were down for that long. And we can't recover that. I can't just put the machines on super turbocharge and produce $1 million worth of lumber products that didn't exist. We don't have time to do that. We can't add another line. In working with you, we've had no downtime, no unscheduled downtime. And so we've saved $1 million. You have saved us that $1 million in sales. So this client doesn't have a return on investment calculator, but that's what they use when they're selling to other manufacturing companies. They say, let me tell you a story about a client of ours, a large lumber mill, blah, blah, blah. They went down. They lost $1 million in retail that they can't make up. Now, manufacturing companies know this all too well, especially if they're already running a 24/7 operation. They can't just magically start up another line and reproduce $1 million. Plus, the clients that were expecting that product have gone somewhere else, right? Because they can't wait. And so they just say, this is what happened at one of our other clients. And as a result, they've been a 10-year customer of ours. We've never let that mill go down in unscheduled downtime. And as a result, they say we've saved them $1 million. Does that seem like a fair return on investment for the $50,000 worth of product we're offering to sell you this year? Great. So as we're wrapping up, I'd encourage you guys to continue to ask me more questions. I would also encourage you to use this last slide as an exercise for yourself or for your team, just to help organize your thoughts during a sales presentation. And when I'm doing workshops on sales presentations, we often use this as a template. It's a very simple template just to get people practiced in this style of giving presentations. Based on the conversation I'm recommending, we put whatever feature in there because that's the benefit. And here's where we want to get into, it's going to save you money, it's going to make you money, it's going to reduce your downtime, it's going to reduce your turnover, it's going to create better employee engagement, it's going to reduce your benefit costs, reduce your risk, whatever that is. This will help you meet your objectives, right? State that objectives. For example, what's the proof? It's often a hard thing to do on your own, so maybe you need to ask other people in your organization, hey, do we have proof around this? Keep in mind, for those of you working on big sales teams, you might not have proof specific to the client you're trying to close, but you might have proof from a client in Vancouver, or in Ottawa, or in the States. Maybe another sales rep has a customer that has the same history as your customer. So don't be afraid to reach out across your entire sales network to find that proof. Then what question are you going to ask? Get comfortable. The program investment and the closing question. Now, I love this question. Do you think an in-person presentation is more effective than over the phone or sending the proposal through email? Okay, here's where I'm going to get opinionated. On deals you really want to close, don't send them through email, ever. Now, I know that many of you have important deals, you have kind of important deals, and then you have sort of transactional deals. The transactional one's okay. Or with repeat customers, if you're managing accounts and a client calls and says, hey, Colleen, I need a quote on 2 more licenses. Send that by email. That's fine. I do that all the time with my current clients. But with net new customers, you need to be talking them through the proposal so that they understand it. Now, your question about in-person versus on the phone is an interesting one. I think in person is always better if you can do it, but I know that it's not always possible. What I like on the phone, what I'd encourage is an interactive platform. So I have a client who's in the leasing business. I've been working with them for about 12 years. When I started with them, they were an independent leasing company. They were in Rochester. So arguably not the center of America in terms of airport access, right? And their clients were all over the U.S. They were really early adopters of video conferencing. So while they were using like a GoToMeeting or a WebEx, they used the video component so that their client could always see them. The client didn't always have access to video, so it wasn't always two-way, but at least it was one-way, and it helped to build a relationship. And they would always schedule that draft meeting to run through the proposal and the final meeting where they would bring the proposal up in a real-time environment like we're looking at it here, and they'd bring up their picture. And if the client said, oh, hey, that's not right, we're buying 100 computers, not 1,000, they'd make the changes on the fly so the customer could see those. They grew faster than any other business in their industry. They got bought by a great regional bank in California, and then they were bought by the Royal Bank, and they continue to outpace every sales team, and they have always done it by video. So if you've got access to that kind of technology or the technology we're using here or Zoom or something, then definitely use it. If not, try to get out and see your customers if you can, but I implore you not to send it by email because that's when we get ghosting in the sales process, right? And we all hate ghosting. No one likes to be ghosted. How do you politely decline sending your presentation over by email to the gatekeeper? Oh, I tell them. I mean, especially if it's a gatekeeper who can't make a decision. First of all, I would just say to them, one of the things that's unique about us is we really like to work through our proposals so that everyone has a chance to answer questions. Rather than me sending it over to you, could you arrange a call where all the key stakeholders are available? We can spend half an hour running through the proposal. I can make sure that we didn't under or overscope it in any way. I can put a final proposal together, and then I'd be happy to send it to you. Now, if they say no to that, you have to ask yourself honestly, can I win this business? If you believe you can still win and it's worth it and it's not labor intensive for you to put that presentation together, then by all means do it. If you honestly and know that you can't win, then don't do it. I know in my business, for example, I will not win a speaking engagement or a training engagement if a gatekeeper, like a meeting planner or an executive assistant, calls and says, hey, what are your training rates? Can you speak at my conference? I won't do it without talking to the sales VP. Why? Because I know that the sales VP is a control freak. I was one. They probably have someone in mind already. They probably saw someone somewhere or watched videos or follow someone or read a book. And so I want that sales VP on the phone so I can understand their objectives. And so if the gatekeeper says, no, you just need to send it to me, I say to them, in order for me to put the right proposal together, I have to understand from your VP's perspective what their objectives are. I mean, it's their guys sitting in the room. And if I put the wrong proposal together, I may disappoint them inadvertently. So with all due respect, I need to talk to them before we put a proposal together. And if they say no, then I politely decline. That's the way I do it. I mean, ethically, I don't think it's right for us as salespeople to be sending proposals to people who don't control the budget. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. I think I've answered all the questions so far that have come up. But if there's any other, I can bring CPSA back on the line to see if they've received any questions or if there's any questions that they want to address while we're wrapping things up.
I think you've answered all of our questions, Colleen. There were lots. Thank you so much to the attendees for such great participation today.
Yeah, it's great. Do you want to let everyone know how they can get the PDF handout? Because I saw that a number of questions came through on that, and maybe others have the question as well.
Yeah, of course. So the PDF of this presentation is located within your GoToWebinar dashboard or control panel under the handout section, but I will be sending it out via email anyhow, so please stand by. Same with the webinar recording, that will be emailed out shortly as well.
Great. And I would encourage everyone to stay in touch with myself at engageselling.com. I've got listed here my website. You can find me on social media on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to connect with you, or Facebook. The nssb.me is a direct link to buy a copy of Nonstop Sales Boom in audio or old-fashioned Kindle or hard copy. And the CPSA as well.
Thank you so much, Colleen. On behalf of the CPSA, we love this book, so thank you so much for joining us today on such an informative webinar. And on behalf of the CPSA, to our attendees, thank you so much for taking the time to take part in today's webinar and to build your skills in sales presentations. If you are not yet a member of the CPSA, I'd love to invite you to join us with a 30-day free trial, which is located at cpsa.com/trial-membership, just on the screen here. Thank you so much, everybody, and Colleen, have a great day.
Yeah, I will. And everyone have a great long weekend. Happy selling going into the end of Q3.
Happy selling, everybody. Talk soon.
Bye.